And to discuss the ongoing war and, of course, the broader conflict across West Asia region, we are being joined by Jennifer Ewing, who's spokesperson for Republicans Overseas UK. We are also being joined by James Jackson, journalist and political analyst. Appreciate you both joining us on the broadcast. First up, going across to Ewing. Strait of Hormuz remains the epicenter of the war. Iran has, of course, enforced no-move zone in the Strait of Hormuz, which has essentially paralyzed global oil shipping. Important to mention that US had earlier even denied its Navy escorted a tanker through that very strait. The question is, does Trump have a counter for Iran's Hormuz strategy?
Well, it doesn't look like it at the moment, does it? And what's so fascinating and disappointing and concerning about this entire issue is that the U.S. had fairly good control over the Strait of Hormuz before. We protected those shipping lanes. And now, because we've entered this war, and we're not exactly sure, is this about nuclear weapons? Is it about ballistic missiles? Is it about regime change? Is it about, as you mentioned, unconditional surrender? We're now actually very vulnerable in the Strait of Hormuz, which I could argue as somebody who voted for the president not to enter wars that were not existential to the United States. I could actually argue that the Strait of Hormuz is in our national interest. So ironically, by going after all of these other goals, shall we say, that the president has set forth, along with our partners, Israel, we're messing up on the biggest issue.
Yes. Mr. Jackson, taking that same point across with him as well, IEA member countries will carry out largest ever oil stock release amid market disruptions and the blockage of the Strait of Hormuz, 400 million barrels of oil to be precise. In fact, additionally, U.S. Energy Department said that they will release 172 million barrels of oil from its strategic petroleum reserve. The question is that enough to offset the supply chain disruption we are seeing at this stage?
I mean, absolutely not. I think the entire supply, which people have in reserve, is equivalent to about 4 days of traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. I think people really underestimate how strategically important this was and continues to be. In fact, there was, I believe, a Goldman Sachs analyst who said, you know, closing the Strait of Hormuz wasn't just the worst case scenario, it was unimaginable. We've seen already the US's European allies start to get cold feet about a mission which they were quite ambivalent about to begin with Europe quite divided on this. But, you know, even pro-Trump figures like Germany's Chancellor Merz, as soon as the petrol prices started to rise and domestic pressure came on from media, from people within his party, he started to back away and address concerns. So I really, you know, it sounds like I'm in agreement, Jennifer, here, that this war is not in the US's national interest. It's against what Trump promised, and it doesn't have the support of allies. So it's actually the US is isolating itself, and even, as it says there on your Chiron, losing its sense of invincibility, because the US is not the global policeman. It is the global superpower, but they can't win everything all the time, and they appear to have picked a fight with a regime for whom survival is utterly paramount, and who, because of economic isolation, is absolutely willing to take a bit of suffering, but to damage its neighbors in the Gulf and US allies rather than fight Israel and the US directly, which is actually a pretty smart tactic.
Yes. James, we will come to the Gulf countries in just a bit, but let's go across to Ewing again. Talking about the statements coming in from President Trump, which have been quite whimsical to say the least. He's claimed victory in Iran, but also says that the job is not yet finished. This while he had earlier said that the war could stretch beyond 3 weeks. Has Trump lost a sense of invincibility and he's actually realized the cost of the war at present?
Are you asking me?
Yes, yes.
Hi. Look, I think at the moment, yes. However, it doesn't mean that it's not unsalvageable. There's a very serious argument going on within the Trump coalition, i.e. the people who voted for the president, who, you know, vehemently disagree on the actions that he's taken with regards to Iran. as you can tell, and because James and I kind of agreed on the last question, I'm one of those people that don't believe we should be involved. However, now that we're here, it is what it is. I think that what he needs to do is just declare victory in that bombastic way that he always does. Everything's great. He's perfect. He's the best. And just hope that we can de-escalate as soon as possible, end this whole thing, and he might have a chance based on a lot of the media that is going into the United States. I, by the way, am based in the UK, but he might have a chance to basically redeem himself, shall we say. But that is only if this does not escalate and he backs out now.
Yes. James, in fact, in an interview with Axios, Trump reiterated that war may actually end soon, but did not provide a timeline. In fact, on the contrary, Israel's defense minister suggested that the timeline for ending the war is open-ended. The question is, are US and Israel on the same page as far as the timeline of the war is concerned?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I can see Jennifer shaking her head here. I agree with Jennifer again. I'm enjoying being in this position because we don't often agree. But actually, I think this is a case where the US and Israel's interests are completely opposed, actually. They're not just on different pages. Israel is acting as a rogue state in the Middle East. It has many times before, but this time it's really dragged the US into it. And, there was a statement by Trump. We don't know if it was just him being bombastic or if it's true, but the plans for regime change have to be on hold because Israel killed or bombed everyone who the US was planning to take over. So, I think Trump would love to see the Islamic Republic replaced by some kind of more liberal force. He's already, they've killed Khamenei. To be replaced by Khamenei, his son, it has to be added. But really, it looks like a case of what we would call the tail wagging the dog. So it's not the big boss who's in charge. It's the local, proxy, in a sense, of Israel seems to be calling the shots more than the US. And I think that's actually somewhat humiliating for Trump. A large majority of Americans actually see that Trump is more responsive to Benjamin Netanyahu than to their own needs. And for a president who is claiming to be America first, their voters are actually asking, are you Israel first instead?
All right. Let's also quickly take that same point across to, in fact, I'd like to talk about the Gulf countries here, Ewing. The fact that Gulf Cooperation Council nations are dragged in the ongoing war. The GCC states it very clear. They've publicly announced that they would not allow their territories to be used for launching attacks. How does this place the geopolitical dynamics at large?
As an America First voter, who's somebody who thought, while I want to remain a superpower, I don't want to continue the United States being the world's superpower. That's why we weren't for continuing, going to war with Russia on behalf of Ukraine. That didn't make sense. So with regards to these countries, in a very strange way, I think that having our bases there has done nothing but harm them. So maybe we don't need all these bases all over the world. Now, that might sound incredibly naive, and I know that even some of my Republican colleagues would probably say that that sounds a bit naive. But, the more bases we have in these areas, the more they're going to be targets, and the more our allies who we're hoping to develop economic relationships with are going to doubt us and, quite frankly, look at us as a dangerous partner. I mean, one of the best moments in the Trump presidency the second time around was the speech he gave to the GCC countries, about 6 months ago, talking about, hey, we don't want to spread democracy to you guys anymore. We're not in that business. What we want to do is do business with you and make you prosperous, make us both prosperous. So I loved that. A lot of America First people did love that. Peace by prosperity. So, you know what? Maybe in the end, we won't end up with all of these bases, and maybe that's not such a bad thing.
Even point taken. Let's quickly take that word with James as well. James, would you want to counter that, or would you agree with what Ewing has said?
I mean, I do agree to an extent, absolutely. I think, actually, it's interesting that Donald Trump seems to have started this year thinking we want to be a global superpower, but each one of his actions has like reduced the US to a regional power in the Western Hemisphere, right? There was this talk about the Don Roe doctrine of dominating the Western Hemisphere, but while they took out Maduro in Venezuela, and now it looks like, pursuing escalation in the US has fractured the relationship with the Gulf allies. So the US is probably in the long term after this, I think. This could be America's equivalent of the Suez Crisis, which marked the end of the British Empire, according to many historians. And this could actually be a retreat from global power, global superpower status, towards more of a regional power status. And, the question is, who's going to fill in the gaps there? Is it Saudi Arabia? Is it Iran even? I think that's unlikely, but Russia. So we're entering a multipolar world, and Donald Trump is only accelerating that, despite his shows of force, which are actually, in some cases, when he can't get the job done, it's a show of US weakness. And as a superpower, perception is everything. So you don't want to show that weakness. You don't want to show that the Houthis can control shipping or the IRGC can control shipping. I think that's really dangerous for American influence. But, I'm not an American voter. If they want to step away from the role of global policeman, that's fine with me in many cases. But I just hope that Europe can step up and stay independent rather than being America's lapdog.
Point taken, James and Jennifer. That's all the time we have. Remains to be seen where this actually takes us and if there is light at the end of the tunnel or not. Appreciate you both speaking to WION.